Yesterday I actually watched this, right? Oh, I just did something. Hold up. I watched this yesterday. This is something that happened in the 90s. I was in my 20s when it happened, and it was a long ass time ago. I was trying to remember what the name of the sitcom he was on when this happened. I think it was called um News something. News something. And I think there was a lot of other SNL people on it. I think Andy Dick comes up in this too. Andy Dick is the one of the SNL people who ultimately got a lot, like when the Me Too movement came out, he had a lot of claims against him. He had a lot of claims against him. I'm fairly certain he's in my spreadsheet. Um, Andy Dick gets involved in this. So this is the case of Phil Hartman. Apparently, for my new viewers, this seems to be what you like about like the kind of content that I put out there. And basically, I'm doing react videos, right? Using my own personal references from my life experiences, my memories, or business knowledge, or whatever it might be. But in the case of these types of hashtag true crime type of things, it's usually subculture knowledge, right? And just general common sense of, hey, that was stupid. They shouldn't have done that, right? Okay, so this one's a sad one. This one is Phil Hartman, y'all. It's Phil Hartman. Let's go.
Saturday Night Live. Since 1975, the late night comedy show has been fundamental in introducing the world to some of the most well respected and hilarious comedians and launching their careers into the stratosphere. Jim Belushi, Chevy Chase, Gilda Radner, Bill Murray, Al Franken, Gilbert Gottfried, Eddie Murphy, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Billy Crystal, Martin Short, Joan Cusack, John Lovitz, Dana Carvey, Mike Myers, Chris Rock, David Spade, Chris Farley, and Adam Sandler are just some of the men and women whose careers were launched by the Saturday night staple.
Amy Poehler, Bill Hader, Fred Armisen. Who was the brunette chick who was doing the Sarah Palin impressions? She got some shows too. Kean? No, Keenan. He's been on for like multiple decades. Um, you got Colin, and Michael Che, and Colin. What's Colin's last name? And they got a whole new cast that's really good too. They've had all kinds of talent, and yeah, you know what you're gonna find out in this particular segment is that a lot of them come from the Groundlings, which is a drama club. Basically, they teach acting classes in Hollywood. I have a friend who actually was attending Groundlings trainings up in Hollywood about 20 years ago. But that's where a lot of them come from. That's where they train up and they get recruited directly out of that. So Lorne Michaels must have some sort of hookup with the Groundlings in Hollywood.
When SNL began, it was groundbreaking, as airing a live comedy show featuring completely untested and unheard of comedians was risky. All of the comedians were known within their circles, with most having been in the comedy space for years. Many were a part of various comedy troupes around the US and had been nearly famous multiple times over. They were struggling actors and actresses who enjoyed making people laugh so much they went out of their way to perform whenever they could. In certain spaces, on certain days, they were famous in their own right, but they had yet to be given a real chance to shine. That is, until Lorne Michaels gave them a chance. The network didn't trust that Lorne Michaels and the group of funny men and women could be able to toe the line on television of what was appropriate. And for the first few years, the show existed.
There's at least two comedy clubs. The Comedy Store, and there's one other one right on Sunset Strip, which is geographically very close to where the Groundlings actually does their shit, right? Does their classes, their plays, whatever they're doing. I've never actually been there, so I don't know exactly how it goes. I just have a friend who happened to like be attending classes. But I think the Groundlings location was on Melrose, and the other ones, the actual like the big comedy places were on Sunset Boulevard up on the Sunset Strip. And these are not far. I mean, you could Uber there for probably like $5. It's not. It's pretty close. You know what I'm saying?
In a state of constant limbo. Would it be canceled? Would it be renewed? Were they going too far or not far enough? Yearly, regardless of the ratings, Lorne would sit down with the executives at NBC and fight for the show to stay on the air. It seemed that the higher-ups didn't understand or didn't want to understand. But, given only to Lorne's powers of persuasion, the show would become a pop culture linchpin. Despite the chaos happening behind the scenes, the energy around the show was electric for everyone involved. The constant threat of being shut down kept cast members on their toes, and the writers turned in some of their best work. If they were going to go out, they wanted to make sure they were doing what they believed in. But it wasn't just the work that made the behind the scenes so hectic. Cast members went from relatively unknown to celebrities overnight, and were able to transfer their comedy chops into mainstream movie success. It was often joked about that 1 year on SNL was all you.
Tina Fey, right? It was Tina Fey. Tina Fey used to do the Sarah Palin impression. The thing is, I think it was Tina Fey, or it was one of the other actors. I think it was Tina Fey, who said that maybe it was Seth Meyers. They didn't mention him either, right? Whoever this dude is, he didn't mention him, right? There was somebody who used to have the news desk because they always have the like weekend news or whatever, and they said that is the best position on SNL to have because you actually say your name, and so people remember your name, right? So there was a time at which I think it was Tina Fey and Amy Poehler that were doing the news desk, and then at some point Seth Meyers came in. I mean, they switch them out all the time, and right now it's Colin Jost and Michael Che, right? But they're probably going to switch them out ultimately too because they're constantly doing like a clean house of their cast, and these people move on to other projects, right?
Need to make it in Hollywood as a comedian, because surviving that meant you were tried and tested. There was no better job to have on your resume as a comedian, said Jan Hooks, because they throw everything in the kitchen sink at you every week. If you handle one episode of SNL, you can handle any movie set. We were changing sketches 5 minutes before they aired live. We were dealing.
And Maya Rudolph. I don't want to like. I don't want to. Maya Rudolph. She was there too.
With celebrity temper tantrums, all while running on nearly no sleep. Everything else I have done since has been easy, said John Mulaney. For as many stars that have graced the cast list in the 47 years SNL has been on the air, there have been very few tragedies. Most have gone on to enjoy a lifetime of success in their chosen arena, and have continued to make the world laugh for the duration of their careers. However,
there have been very few tragedies? What are you talking about? What's her face? Gilda Radner ended up getting cancer from like a saccharin addiction, right? Like saccharin addiction. She was constantly having saccharin with vodka or something like that. You got Jim Belushi. You got Chris Farley, right? I mean, they've had a lot. I mean, there is a whole background of SNL members getting cursed by having their time on this show. So to say that they've had very few tragedies is okay. I get you. I get you. This one was an actual murder. But a lot of these motherfuckers OD'd, okay? They either OD'd or they had some other health issue that resulted in the stress of working on this show. Give me a break. Oh my God.
Today, we are covering the case of a man who was cut down in what would have been the prime of his career, Phil Hartman. Welcome back to another episode of Dreading, brought to you today by our Patreon. This case is one of the most senseless deaths I've ever reported on, and unfortunately, a lot of information around this case has been misreported, given how sensationalized it was at the time. The media really took the bare bones of the story and ran with it, creating and spreading unsubstantiated rumors for years, which has left the Hartman family in a state of distress. There are various stories that have spread about what happened to Phil, as well as his private life, that only came out after his death, which I will not be giving any credence to out of respect. The research I did for this case mostly included listening to the audiobook You Might Remember Me by Mike Thomas on Audible, which was written about Phil.
Well, I can cut to the chase for you all. Basically, they were cocaine abusers, and she was completely drugged out when she did what she did. I'll just cut to the chase. Let's go.
Hartman's entire life, as well as Live from New York, the complete uncensored history of Saturday Night Live. If you're interested in learning more about this case, or about Saturday Night Live in general, I highly suggest reading or listening to these books. The stories throughout paint a well-rounded picture of him, and what occurred the night he was killed. This video, like the vast majority of my uploads, has been copyrighted by a third party, given that the footage I used to fill throughout, which means I do not earn any money from this video. And if there are ads on it, they are placed by a third party who claimed the footage. In this case, NBC. If you would like to support the channel.
By the way, NBC, if you want to claim, you want to throw some videos here, you want to throw some commercial fun and like monetize my video, totally cool. Just don't like pull my video down because I'm just doing a react, right? Like I'm just doing a react video. But if you want to fucking earn some money on my videos, you can totally do that. Throw some commercials up. I don't care. I don't fucking care. It would be nice though if you like gave me a heads up. If you gave me a heads up so that I know that that's what's happening and I'm not like, why the fuck is YouTube putting commercials on my video? That would be very helpful. But like literally react videos are fair use. And it would be nice if you all, like, stopped your bullshit, right?
Please consider subscribing to my Patreon, linked below. If you like true crime content and want to see more of it, please consider subscribing or liking this video, as it helps me in the algorithm. If there is a case you would like to see me cover, feel free to leave it in the comments down below or email me, as I am always open to your suggestions. With all that,
let's do it right now. I'm giving you a like. I'm already following your channel, but I'm giving you a like on this video because this is one of the, I still want to, like, I want to know, did you cover, Charlie Manson? Because that's the biggest shit that happened in LA, right? It would be nice if you had a Charlie Manson video.
That said, let us begin.
Okay, let's go. Oh, what's this, a commercial? It's fucking commercial, you guys.
Phil Hartman was the kind of kid who always went the extra mile to get a laugh. He was the guy who, with very little provocation, would go on a 10-minute comedic monologue over something as simple as applesauce and leave everyone in stitches. But to say that was his destiny would be a lie. Phil was born September 24th, 1948, in Brantford, Ontario.
Dude, he was like 1 year younger than my parents, y'all. He's 1 year younger than my parents. This is so freaky to me.
To his parents Doris and Rupert Hartman. He was the middle child of the family, being the fourth kid out of 8 total children. And because of that, Phil had to work hard to get the attention he so thoroughly desired from his parents. His siblings recalled that their parents, though loving and supportive, had very little time to give to them. which often left them feeling unseen. Their father worked tirelessly.
That's because they were the like boom. No, oh no, he's the boomer, right? He's the boomer. So his parents came from the greatest generation. They were the ones who had to get through the Great Depression, deal with World War II, all that bullshit. So the generations before us, like my generation, we were called helicopter parents because we were around all the time and we were like totally involved. But like everybody before us was like, whatever, you might get kidnapped. Who cares? It's all good.
To keep a roof over their head as a salesman, and was doing all he could to make sure they had food on the table. Meanwhile, their mother was always trying to find ways to make money while taking care of the day to day. His siblings went on to say that unless you were going above and beyond, positively or negatively, you weren't being considered very much. His younger sister, Sarah Jane, required around-the-clock care from Doris and the family, as she had Angelman syndrome, a rare genetic disorder that's characterized by delayed development, intellectual disability, severe speech impairment, and problems with movement and balance. At the time, Angelman syndrome wasn't widely known, and there were very few options when it came to care. The family had considered putting Sarah Jane in a facility where they would be better equipped to support her needs. However, they weren't able to find a facility that they felt was good enough. This led to them taking on all her medical and physical needs, which left the family with even less money and time to give to each other. When Sarah was born, Phil was only 3 years old, and in his mind, a lot of Sarah's disability was his fault. He couldn't wrap his head around the idea that her diagnosis had nothing to do with him, and when his mother was too exhausted from taking care of her to pay attention to him, he internalized that thought, feeling as though he would never truly be worthwhile. This deep need for validation that he was not getting from his family led Phil to comedy. As he was growing up, he realized that academically, he wasn't going to beat his brothers and sisters, who had all gotten A's in school. In sports, he felt like he would never beat his All-American jock older brother. He needed his own outlet, something that he could be recognized for. And the moment he was able to make his entire family laugh, he felt a rush like he had never felt in his life. The feeling of validation that swept over him was something that he'd never experienced before, and he was going to follow that as far as it would take him. In school, that led him to being voted class clown by his high school graduating class, which also included future Manson family member Lynette Squeaky Fromay. He had been the bane of most of his teachers' existence, as he would use their classes as a workshop for his comedy. He would riff on the different subjects, and his jokes would never fail to get laughs. Phil's need for validation didn't...
Wait, how do you drop that? How do you fucking drop that he knew a Manson clan member? Like, oh, by the way, how did you just drop that and just fucking move on? Oh, yeah, you knew a Manson clan. Come on, man.
Just apply to his love of making people laugh. He never felt as if he truly fit in where he was, and would constantly put on different hats in order to try and find where he would belong. He would take up different societal roles, like that of a stoner, the rocker dude, the athlete, and immerse himself deeply in that character. He would take on the personality of the people he was around, trying to find people he felt like understood him. But each time, he would feel like an imposter. Most who knew him as a fun-loving, spirited guy who knew when to pull back on a joke before it went too far. The guy who would do almost anything to make people smile and brighten their days. But few knew how deep and introspective Phil actually was. His longtime childhood friend was able to recall only one instance when he saw what he described as the real Phil. The real Phil, he said, was withdrawn and curious about the universe. Life and death fascinated him, and it was only in small moments that Phil was truly comfortable with the people around him that he would allow his mask to fall and give way to...
You should probably, like, next time you actually cover a subject like this, just like if you do happen to see my video, you should actually cover imposter syndrome, because that is an actual thing, right? He felt like an imposter, right? That is an actual mental condition. And I mean, I'm not a doctor, so I can't tell you about it, but it's maybe something that, like, if you're going to cover one of these videos again, you should probably bring it up.
Who he actually was. Phil's need for validation, his incredible ability to find the humor in anything, and his deep introspection led him to being a big hit amongst the girls. He was always able to make them laugh. And though he didn't outwardly appear to be romantic, he would write every one of his girlfriends deep, poetic love letters, professing his feelings and stating how in awe of their beauty he was. One of his high school girlfriends, Kathy Costa, would later attest to the fact that though he had a poet's hand and would write her some of the most beautiful words, as a boyfriend, he could be quite withholding. He liked the chase and the dramatics of love, and the highs of being together, and the lows of being apart. He needed to feel needed by the other person, lest he feel he was being ignored or pushed to the side, and his constant seeking of validation from other people often led him to leaving romantic partners before they could leave him. But he was never aggressive or demanding. Instead, he would become incredibly withdrawn. If he felt as if his needs weren't being met, or if he was being pushed to the side, he would close himself off emotionally, becoming detached to his partner without so much as an explanation as to why. Many of his friends noted the same thing, as Phil responded to stressful situations by emotionally detaching, leaving the other person to figure things out on their own. Lisa Strain would go on to state that Phil would disappear emotionally. Phil's body would be there, but he would be in his own world. That passivity made you crazy. To many who witnessed Phil's emotional detachment in moments of high stress, it felt as if he didn't care and would just give up on things when they got difficult. But to those who knew him best, it was clear that confrontation and high stress was too much for him. In times of great emotion, he would lose his words and be unable to properly communicate. Only after detaching and getting space would he be able to properly explain himself, though most of the time it would take years for him to do so. After high school, Phil briefly attended college to pursue a degree in art instead of pursuing one in acting. He had seen his brother John pursue acting himself, only for nothing to come of it, and he wanted to make sure he had something to fall back on. He was incredibly artistically inclined, having drawn cartoons for his high school paper, but felt like, once again, it was a mask he wore to conceal what he truly wanted to do. A mask that would quickly fall off when his brother and a group of friends created a live concert venue called the Kaleidoscope. John, the brother that had unsuccessfully pursued acting, had found work at a talent agency that focused solely on music, where he worked with the likes of Sonny and Cher. But that didn't stop him from dreaming bigger. With friends Skip Taylor and Gary Essert, Phil's brother bought the property and brought their vision to life. The venue would serve as the backdrop for some of the most atrocious shows of all time, and though it was only open for 6 months, became one of the most popular venues of all time. Bands like Jefferson Airplane, The Grateful Dead, and Genesis all graced the Kaleidoscope stage, and Phil was at the center of it. He regularly attended concerts and made friends with some of the most famous bands of all time. Using his comedy chops, Phil would often pretend to be characters at these shows. Sometimes he would pretend to be a roadie so he could get backstage. Other times he would convince girls that he was the security detail.
Well, I mean, that's kind of how it goes. Like, they all know each other. Like, all rock stars want to be actors. All actors want to be rock stars. This is not unusual. I have been told this by various people I know in the industry. We're going to take a short pause so that I can get the heat pad on my knee. Okay. I have changed positions. I am now heating my knee with my naked cat that I just got a medical shave for earlier this week. Let's go.
For his friend, who he claimed was a famous stuntman that had just finished a day of shooting some movie. People were drawn to him and wanted to be around him, just to see what he would do next. And when the venue inevitably shut down after only a couple months in operation, one of the bands that had taken a liking to Phil offered him a job as a roadie. He toured with the band, living with them as they traveled around, until finally he settled down with his first wife, Gretchen Lewis. Together, they lived at the Foo House, a home that was owned by the band, where groupies came in and out as they pleased. For Gretchen, it was a difficult time, but eventually the pair was able to get their own place, albeit with the help of her father. After about 2 years together, they would divorce. Neither had any animosity towards each other, and in fact, Gretchen would recall them both just feeling like it had been the best thing to do. According to her, the relationship just kind of ended. No fanfare, no anger. One day it was just over, and that was that. After his divorce, Phil went back to school and got a degree in graphic art, and his brother hired him at his music production company as their only full-time graphic designer. He went on to make multiple iconic album covers, including the artwork featured on the Poco album Legend, and created the logo for Crosby, Stills, and Nash that they still use today. Phil was supporting himself by doing what he loved, but still he felt unfulfilled. He loved art and design and felt incredibly proud to put his own stamp on the music he loved, but he had gotten his degree as a fallback. What he really wanted to do was act and make people laugh. But he felt as if there was no money to be made in that. Being a working comedian was hard, but being a failed comedian was just embarrassing. For the most part, he got by entertaining the music acts that came through his office day in and day out. He would make up characters on the spot, riff on things going on in pop culture, and bring everyone to tears. But when he was left on his own to create, he found himself unfulfilled. One night after work, he and a friend went out to see a comedy troupe called The Groundlings at a small theater. Citing an issue backstage, the group was running late with the performance. Sensing mild upset in the audience, Phil decided to spring into action and entertain the crowd with his own comedy stylings for about 15 minutes. The group could hear the laughter from backstage, and many members looked out to see what they described as a random-looking guy doing his own bits. Some members were perturbed, thinking a wayward comedian was trying to use their stage as an open mic, but even more were entertained, finding his improv skills to be top-notch. After the Groundlings performed that night, Phil inquired about joining, after serving as sort of opening act for them, and making the entire audience burst out laughing. He realized that he might have what it takes to be a comedian the way he always wanted. He was informed that joining the group would mean taking years of improv classes at his own expense, and immediately joined. Unbeknownst to him, he was well on his way to becoming one of the most well-respected and loved comedians of all time. His time with the Groundlings has become something of myth.
Well, that's the thing, is that it's not just that, yes, it is at your own expense that you're taking the classes, but this particular group is like a launching ground to a lot of other things like SNL and stuff. And so people want to participate in this group because of their history of launching people like Phil Hartman and several other SNL stars and other stars and stuff. And so it's one of these drama places in Hollywood where you study. You have to pay, obviously, to take the classes, but you learn performance with some of the best in the industry, and they have so many connections to other to like people like Lorne Michaels and stuff, that you can get drafted up pretty easily because you're by taking those classes you're like in the limelight. This is why my friend was doing it like 20 years ago, although she didn't get picked up, but I'll be real, she wasn't very good. I took drama with her at Saddleback College, and look, I've done drama a lot. Had I paid for something like that, I might have gotten picked up, but I worked with a lot of other people who really thought they were going to get picked up, and they were not going to get picked up. I might not have gotten picked up either, but I did actually get fucking phone calls when I was in junior high, and my grandfather turned them down. He's not interested. Oh my god, even. But yeah, the Groundlings is like it's launching ground, you guys.
Everyone who knew him was always in awe of his ability. Most newcomers to the group would struggle with their first attempts at improv, feeling too self-conscious to play along with the more established members' skits. But not Phil. He came armed with various characters who he had personified for years. He could be anyone they needed him to be, and even small lines felt funny when he said them. The years Phil had spent adopting different lifestyles and characteristics in his day-to-day life had paid off, and he could seamlessly transform from a smarmy businessman who thought too highly of himself to a laid-back surfer dude who smoked too much pot to keep his eyes open. And what's more, he had the natural ability to make every character feel real. At the same time, Phil met and married his second wife, Lisa Strain. Phil would go on to state that Lisa and him were soulmates. She was a challenge for him and kept him on his toes in ways that others hadn't. He described her in letters as a firecracker and someone who could bring anyone to their knees with her words. She was smart, funny, and beautiful, and she provided him with a sense of belonging that he hadn't had prior. However, much like with his previous relationships, when problems arose, Phil retreated. Lisa would call his emotional detachment out and found herself going out of her way to try and get his attention back on her. She would dress provocatively when they were together, going out of her way to get his attention, and he would still reject her advances. He seemed resigned and checked out of the relationship. And after months, Lisa began to feel like he didn't love her anymore. This wasn't the case, however. The two lacked the ability to properly communicate about their feelings. Lisa wanted attention and affection, and Phil didn't know what he needed, and was entirely incapable of expressing himself in a way that Lisa was able to understand. And so, after 3 years together, the pair would break up, but Phil would never stop loving her. Despite the hardship in his romantic life, Phil quickly established himself within the group as being the top comedic dog, which was high praise, given that at the time the group featured comedians Paul Rubens, Cassandra Peterson, better known as Elvira Mistress of the Dark, and John Lovitz. His sketches and ideas were put at the top of every pile, and every time he was on stage, he was guaranteed to get laughs. But after a couple of years, Phil began to get disheartened. Over the years, he watched other members of the Groundlings get incredible professional opportunities and leave the group to have successful careers of their own. Paul Rubens left the group after the character he had made, Pee Wee Herman's, became a star in his own right, with a movie and television series.
Let's be real, though. He totally ruined his career because he got caught masturbating in a porn theater in Hollywood, right? Isn't that what happened? Isn't that what happened? He was supposed to be this, actor who was appealing to kids, and he got caught masturbating in a porn theater in Hollywood. You totally skipped that.
Phil, being one of the people who helped shape Pee-wee as a character, wrote part of the screenplay for Pee-wee's Big Adventure and had a significant role in Pee-wee's Playhouse, but he couldn't help but feel left behind. This ended with a dissolution of Rubens and Hartman's friendship, one that would never be repaired. Later on,
By the way, look up Lawrence Fishburne. Look up Lawrence Fishburne. I think was it Pee-wee's Playhouse, or was it the other guy? The other guy that kind of looks like him. He was like a cowboy, right? He has something too. He's they all got this weird 80s shit going on. All right.
Lorne Michaels came to the Groundings show looking for new talent for the SNL cast. The group was shocked when he scouted Lovitz over Hartman, and even more shocked that Lovitz didn't try to bring Hartman with him. Hartman felt like his career had hit its apex, and that he had already gone as far as he would be able to go. The small parts in movies and shows, and some voice acting work he had under his belt, left him feeling as if he had ultimately failed in his pursuit of fame, and he was close to giving up. That was until he met Bren Amdahl.
Did you know that AAA members get exclusive discounts and benefits when they rent a car with Hertz? Whether you're planning a vacation getaway or a
was close to giving up. That was until he met Bren Amdahl. If Bryn Omdahl was alive today, she would be increasingly bitter that her celebrity status is only due to her attachment to her husband and the murder she committed. Most of the reporting around Bryn's life was done through the lens of what she would go on to do to Phil. Though details are sparse about her early life, they are illuminating. Bryn was born Vicky Jo Omdahl on April 11, 1958, in small-town Minnesota. She was always a go-getter and the kind of girl who wanted more for herself and thought she deserved to have it. Growing up in the tiny town with a middle-class family, she felt as if she was destined for the bright lights of Hollywood, and she was simply better than those around her. She grew to be a statuesque beauty with bright blonde hair, who towered over her peers. People would go on to describe her as an all-American beauty and the ultimate girl next door. Many who encountered her immediately told her she should be a model and go into show business, and she loved the praise. Vicky Jo would go on to drop out of high school to marry her longtime boyfriend, Douglas Torfin. However, the marriage would sour with her growing need for recognition. Torfin wanted to start the next phase of their life. He wanted to settle down and have children, but Vicky was more interested in her career. According to those who knew her at this point in her life, she became obsessed with the idea that she was going to be famous, and there was virtually nothing that anyone could do to stop her. After 9 years of marriage, Vicky Jo left Douglas and moved to Minneapolis to start her modeling career. After some middling success in Minneapolis, she felt confident moving all the way across the country to California, more specifically Hollywood. Everyone around her told her that she had exactly the right look to be a star, and after taking a few acting courses, she felt as if it would be a breeze. Before leaving, she was told that her name didn't quite fit the high fashion model aesthetic she was going for, and didn't feel quite Hollywood enough. Thus, she made the decision to change it to Brendan, then later settling on Bryn. She felt the name was more exotic and alluring, and noted excitedly that no one knew any other stars with that name. In Minnesota, Bryn had been a big deal. People paid attention to her, and she was able to get what she wanted with relative ease. People stopped and stared at her everywhere she went, and she was given special treatment because of that. But in Hollywood, she had a hard time. Despite her natural beauty and flirty nature, she found that tall, pretty blondes weren't exactly rare there, and she fit in more than stood out. Her friends had been right to say that she had the Hollywood look, but so did everyone else in Hollywood. After a short while, she got some work as a swimsuit model, but rarely, if ever, got callbacks for the acting roles she went out for. But her luck would change when a longtime friend would set her up on a blind date with aspiring actor and comedian Phil Hartman. From the moment she laid eyes on him, Bryn knew he was the one, or at least that's what she told her friends. She thought he was hysterical, and often paired his enthusiasm for his projects. She believed in him fiercely before he was super successful, and was often his loudest cheerleader, which was something he had deeply craved his entire life. That being said, when she met Phil, he wasn't necessarily unsuccessful. He had written a portion of Pee-wee's Big Adventure, had gotten multiple guest roles on various shows, and was doing multiple voice acting roles. He was earning a great living and making a name for himself in the business. However, his star power was still on the rise when Bryn met him. Despite dating Bryn...
The thing is, too, that for those of you who are not in near the Hollywood market, that's really fucking hard to actually earn a living as an actor or just in Hollywood in general, in like that space. It's really difficult to get in. So if you're able to just even have like a modest living doing it and not have to have a second job, like a wait staff job or something, that's pretty impressive, and anybody who's local to the area would consider that impressive. That, oh, you actually don't have to have a day job. You know, you don't have to pick up other kinds of work to supplement your income. You're actually able to make this work for you. That's really fucking rare in Hollywood, okay? Because everybody's there to try and become movie stars. I'm just being real with you. That's how it goes.
Phil still loved and was deeply emotionally connected to his second wife, Lisa. Though they had broken up and been apart for years by the time Phil met Bryn, Phil still believed that he and Lisa had been soulmates. Their relationship, though it had fallen apart, was one that he felt he could never replicate because she was able to bring the real him out. Though their issues had caused them to split, he still considered her the true love of his life. Bryn supported him and encouraged him not to quit pursuing acting and comedy. She empathized with him about their lack of substantial parts, but she reminded him that compared to her, he was doing brilliantly. After some coaxing from her and his peers, Phil continued with The Groundlings, and in 1986, he would go on to join the cast of SNL. Despite her being outwardly supportive of Phil and pushing him to continue his creative pursuits, many of his friends thought there was something off about her, even early into the relationship. Cassandra Peterson, the actress behind Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, spoke about it, stating that something about Bryn always felt off. Whenever she was around Phil's friends, there was a sense that she was acting, and not acting well, to try and endear herself to them. She seemed desperate for people to like her, and always seemed to be working an angle. When Phil told Cassandra that he planned on marrying Bryn after a year of dating, she recoiled, and told him that she thought it was a bad idea. Cassandra told Phil that there was something wrong with Bryn, and he was rushing in, but he would hear none of it. She went on to say that had been the only time she had ever seen him upset with her, and they didn't talk for months after, likely due in part to the fact that at the time, Bryn was 2 months pregnant. With Phil's star on the rise, and having been so supportive of his creative endeavors, one would assume that Bryn would have been happy with her husband's newfound fame, but the opposite was true. The reality was that Bryn had been supportive when she had been in the same boat as Phil. They were both struggling, and so telling him to keep going wasn't hard, but watching him gain all the success and fame she had wanted was difficult for her. At first, she prodded him to get her on SNL as well. She told him that it would be an easy sell. They were a couple after all, and if he was going to have a scene flirting or kissing with someone, who better to do it than with his wife? A husband and wife comedy team had yet to be done on SNL, and she implored him to ask Lorne to...
I've heard that Kirk Cameron does this too, because he's like super religious, right? So he refuses to do any scenes that involve kissing or any sort of like sexual contact unless it's his wife standing in. I've heard this.
Cast her. The only issue was she wasn't really funny. Instead, Phil was able to get her a very brief spot in the opening credits. In one shot, Phil is announced and seen seated, flirting with a blonde woman at a table. The woman fussing with her hair and earrings was in fact Bryn, and she would go on to tell her friends that getting that one couple of seconds had been difficult, as she kept turning and smiling at the camera. She had been told a couple times not to do so, as she was just an extra, and the entire purpose of the shot was to showcase Phil. But she saw an opportunity and tried to take it. She insistently prodded Phil to get her a position on the show, and Phil, trying to keep her happy, would go to Lorne and the other castmates and try and talk her up. When she came to the set, she would try to impress everyone there with her own comedy chops, without realizing how uncomfortable she was making them. Finally, when she realized that she wasn't going to be allowed on the show, and that Phil's star was still rising, and it didn't mean that hers was too, she got angry. She became increasingly jealous and over-the-top vitriolic towards Phil, often putting down certain achievements and belittling him in order to make herself feel equal to him in the relationship. On certain occasions, she would become physically abusive towards him, and multiple hair and makeup people who worked with Phil at SNL would recall him coming into work with scratches and bruises on his face. On at least one occasion, when she came to visit Phil at work, she decided to sit on the laps of every other male castmate and try to kiss them. Many who were there recalled the experience as being embarrassing, noting that Bryn had stuck her tongue in the ears of multiple men in front of her husband, who was trying to laugh it off. It was obvious to everyone there that she was trying to get a rise out of him and make him angry, but Phil stayed calm, trying to defuse the situation the best he could. Multiple castmates would overhear phone calls between the couple, where she would lay into him about his career, how he wasn't home enough, and how he didn't really care about her. and he would simply accept it, never arguing back past telling her he was doing his job and trying his best. In letters he would write to his friends, he would talk about the abuse, and how when Bryn got angry, he would shut down emotionally, and how that would just make things worse. He relayed that when he got mad, he went into his own world, and she would throw grenades and bombs to get him out. He meant this literally, as oftentimes, in order to escape Bryn's wrath, he would simply go to sleep. But the abuse wasn't just leveled at Phil. Lisa and Phil had reconnected after their breakup and would talk regularly via letter. Both had moved on and were with other people, but in one instance, when talking to Bryn, Phil relayed the fact that he believed Lisa was his soulmate. This angered Bryn to no end, and she repeatedly brought it up in arguments. After the birth of their first child, Sean, Lisa sent a letter of congratulations, saying that the pair would make amazing parents, and she would be there should they need anything. Upon receiving this letter, Bryn was furious. She believed that Lisa was trying to make a pass at Phil, and that this letter was proof of an affair. In response, she sent a 3-page letter threatening—
Oh my God, by the way, Gwyneth Paltrow made this mistake too. I think she, if I'm remembering this story correctly, Gwyneth Paltrow sent some sort of congratulations to Ben, I think it was Ben Affleck, right? At the time, I think she was with Chris Martin, right? But she sent him this note that was totally inappropriate, saying, "Oh, it just makes me think of how we could have had children together." It was really bad letter. And it was all over the news. It was like, are you for real? You can't do that with an ex. Come on. You can't do that. Can't do that.
Lisa, and telling her that if she ever spoke to Phil or her again, she would kill her. This letter included graphic depictions of what she would do to Lisa should she see her in person, and ended with telling her to watch her back. When Lisa received the letter, she was terrified. She told Phil about it, thinking that he couldn't have allowed this to happen and needed to know what kind of person his wife was. However, when she told him about the letter, he simply responded that she should have seen the first draft, as the letter she received was toned down. Bryn was paranoid about every woman and man that Phil spent his time around. She wrote the same kind of vitriol-filled letter to his castmate, Jan Hooks, although he forbade her to send it, telling her that would potentially lead to issues for him at work. Hooks and Hartman were often paired in scenes together and called each other their comedy spouses. For Jan, Phil was the person who would ease her anxiety during shows and would often offer her support before anyone else could think to. They were close friends, something which Bryn detested. At the same time, Bryn hated most of the men that Phil spent his time around as well. Because of his sensitivity and introspection, Bryn would often accuse Phil of being gay. He wasn't, but she grew more and more paranoid the more time he spent with other people. Bryn's insecurities about the relationship didn't just pertain to the people who Phil surrounded himself with. When he shut down emotionally due to the stress of their fighting, she, like Lisa had before her, thought Phil was no longer attracted to her. She would dress up to get his attention, and when that didn't work, she got plastic surgery to make herself look more desirable. She told their friends that it had been a mutual decision, and that Phil loved the changes she made, but he denied this. Privately, he told friends that he had told her not to get the surgeries multiple times, but she insisted he would like her better if she got them. She also thought that the surgeries would make her more employable, and the casting agents would find her more attractive, but she continued not to get work. Shortly after the birth of Sean, Bryn gave birth to their second child, Virgin. Bryn was their full-time caretaker, and when she went out for auditions, she hired a nanny. Her only prerequisite when hiring was that the person be, as she put it, fat and unattractive. That way Phil wouldn't pay attention to them. On multiple occasions, if Phil stopped to speak to their nannies or any help she had hired, they would immediately be fired. The relationship between Bryn and Phil was beyond toxic, but they tried to keep it together. Phil didn't want another divorce, as he didn't want to divorce any of his ex-wives. It had always been them who ultimately ended the relationship. However, he knew no matter who decided to end the marriage, should he divorce Bryn, it wouldn't be as amicable as his last two. For the entirety of his duration on SNL, Phil would talk about Bryn wanting a divorce every other week, and he joked that she would take him for everything he had if she had the chance. But most around him knew he wasn't joking. After 8 seasons, Phil left Saturday Night Live. He had become known as the glue that kept the show together, and was one of, if not the most revered castmate of his time. By the time he made the decision to officially leave, he already had a couple irons under the fire, with multiple creators pitching him his own primetime show based around his comedic talents. He worked with a few talented writers, and each time he tried to find a role for Bryn. He would hype up her talents and skill, and while most producers were courteous, they passed on her altogether, fearing that hiring his wife would lead to chaos in the workplace. At one point, Bryn gave Phil a script for a show she had written herself and asked him to give it to some executives he knew. She was convinced that she had written the next great American sitcom, and that finally, after years of watching Phil succeed, it would be her turn for the spotlight. However, everyone he showed it to passed on it almost immediately, and Phil apologized to them for wasting their time. He felt as if he was debasing himself, like a schoolboy forced to apologize to a teacher. This only served to anger her more, and she became convinced that Phil had purposely got in the way of her success. While Phil continued to flourish in his professional life, Bryn began coping with drugs and alcohol. More specifically,
getting in the way of your success, girlfriend. By the way, she's dead, so the thing is, I think most couples, when they're trying to get opportunities, like job opportunities or whatnot, they're working on their own. Like, I'm not, like, I mean, I'm willing to help a partner. I'm willing to help a spouse, help a partner, but I'm not going to be fucking responsible for their goddamn success. I might like pass along some fucking leads, but I'm not going to look to my spouse to um create my success. You know what I'm saying? Um okay, lazy ass bitch. But anyway, they're both dead now. I'm just being real.
cocaine, she would lash out more aggressively against Phil, telling him that he was the reason she had issues, and threatening to get physical with him in front of the kids. Each time he was made aware of her drug use, he would remove the kids from her care entirely, and insist that she go to rehab on his bill. He felt as if her stress and exhaustion was not unlike his own mother, who had a mental breakdown while taking care of his sister. She too had to seek medical treatment for a short while, and in his mind, Bryn was trying to make the best out of a bad situation, like his mother had, and he needed to be there for her. But after a couple of trips and her repeatedly acting out in front of the kids, Phil had had enough. In 1998, after Bryn had relapsed once more, Phil sat her down. He hadn't wanted to get a divorce prior, and he wanted more than anything for their relationship to work, but she was putting his kids in danger. He told her that if she continued to use drugs, and if she relapsed once again, he was going to leave her. If that meant quitting acting to take care of the kids by himself, he was going to do it. She was a great mother, he said, when she was sober, but he couldn't trust her when she was using. Bryn relayed to her friends that she knew he was serious, and that this was their last shot. She likewise had gone to the doctor, who had prescribed her Zoloft to deal with her mental health. As she spoke about how stressed and unhappy she had been in the last couple years, the couple was on their last legs. According to friends, they were just trying.
I'm going to have to pause it because we're almost to an hour and I know how my phone works. If my video goes over an hour, I will lose the ability to clip off the ads that are on the bottom. There's not a lot long left here. There's about like 9 minutes, but I'm going to do a part 2. That's how we're going to roll.